Good afternoon. My name is Jón Björn Skúlason. I'm from Iceland Green Energy. We've been in this business for quite some time. We started roughly about 7,500 days ago to work on this, and more or less since then we have had policy measures from the government of Iceland regarding hydrogen. Currently, more or less mostly regarding electromobility. In a sense, Iceland Green Energy, which was all started about hydrogen in 1999, more or less we have a current position that we are looking into all alternative fuels, not only hydrogen. And the overall goal of the company is actually to eliminate the use of fossil fuels in Iceland with alternatives. So what we're looking into is, of course, battery technologies, and then hydrogen and all the potential synthetic fuels we can actually get out of hydrogen production. But if we look a little bit at the government policy, which we think is very important to be able to implement any kind of projects, there is a lot of incentives now in place from the government side. We have, for zero emission technologies, there's a VAT exemption on all imported vehicles. And we also have a much lower annual tax, and there are some other incentives coming in place. The government actually has announced that there will be a ban, or at least there will be very high taxes on on fossil fuel vehicles from 2030. To be able to do that, we have proposed to the government that we need to increase the incentives quite a lot if we are to replace the vehicle fleet by that time. So the government is now proposing for the 1st of January 2020 that the VAT incentives will continue at least until end of 2023. This will also now be applicable for buses and coaches, so there will be no VAT on zero-emission buses and coaches. It's also to assist following up what Paul was mentioning regarding tourists, that all zero-emission vehicles can be rented out to tourists or customers without VAT from the 1st of January. There will be no VAT on construction of charging stations, both for homes, apartment buildings and so on, and also the charging stations themselves are actually exempt from VAT. Actually, at the same time, they're going to revoke more or less all VAT on bicycles, electric bicycles, hydrogen bicycles, whatever comes along, and motorcycles. So this is all to promote the difference. Company cars can also be depreciated 100% in 1 year when you buy these vehicles, and we look at that incentives mainly towards larger vehicles like trucks. It's value for companies to be able to write off a truck in 1 year. And the government has declared that they will put quite a substantial amount of money during the next 4 years for building alternative fuel infrastructure. In the beginning, mainly focusing on battery electric vehicles, but then also for other alternatives as they come to the market. So in that case, we're mainly looking at hydrogen installations, but for the maritime sector, there's a lot of interest in synthetic fuels, and I'll come back to that later. Being an early adopter is sometimes complications. We started with the first commercial hydrogen refueling station in the world in 2003. We heard from Mike Hosky, they thought they were early some 10 years ago, or 7 years ago. Then you can imagine how early we were in 2003. We had buses in operation 2003 to 2007, and then we had a fleet of over 30 vehicles in 2008 to 2012. These were a variety of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles and also internal combustion engine vehicles. The reason, of course, when this was all being built, if you go back to the declarations of the car companies in 2000, 2001, 2002, they said there would be a pre-commercial fuel cell vehicles available from 2009, and that's what we were preparing for. In 2005, 6, 7 time frame, we realized that the car manufacturers would never fulfill that promise. Then there were some idiotic bankers in Iceland that made amazing cash for the country. So at that time, actually it was non-sustainable to continue with the hydrogen projects. But we had made agreements with the car OEMs to test their vehicles until the cars would die, or at least until 2012. Because in the contracts of the car manufacturers, the key issue was to understand the implication on the fuel cell with operation. So they wanted the fuel cell to be killed. So we managed more or less to fill all the cars, which was the target. And of course, we didn't manage to see the learnings. We had to ship the fuel cells. The only thing we had to do at the end of the project was to package the fuel cell and send it back to the OEMs. The filling station already became obsolete also quite quickly. It only refuels with 350 bars. Now, of course, we're seeing 700 bars. Electrolyzer was old, needed refurbishment, equipment wear and tear. Those who are working in this field, they know that a 10-year operation in a station, then it's more or less done. There was a lot of valuable resources spent. A lot of people said, "I told you so." Hydrogen was not going to happen, and even people are still telling me, "I told you so." But politicians and people like us need a lot of stamina if you're going to work in this industry. My perception, even though I started in 1999 and we were very optimistic, I actually think I'm just as certain that hydrogen will play a major role in the future of transport. But in what sectors we'll have to see, at least in the large vehicle sector. There's also this discussion which is in society, everybody wants to choose a winner. Everybody wants to, like, it's not going to be hydrogen, it's all going to be batteries, or people say it's all going to be hydrogen. The mix of the system has not been very popular until, I would say, relatively recently, because most people have been saying for the last few years with the battery electric development that actually batteries can cover everything and we can charge everything with batteries. But now the infrastructure companies who are actually building the infrastructure for battery and electric vehicles are realizing all the problems if you have a major installation. We, for example, talked about battery electric vehicles for tourists. We swap 2,000 cars per day at Keflavik Airport. The current companies have been indicating that to be able to, let's say, just have a small part of that as electric, they need 200 to 500, 150 kilowatt chargers. Actually, they would like 350 kilowatt chargers, but the cars are not ready for that. And when you ask the electric infrastructure company in Keflavik, can you provide this to the Keflavik Airport? They just, first of all, to get the power is complicated. The second of all, if you plug them all in, it's going to, all lights are going to blink in the community. And thirdly, the cost of that is going to be enormous. So this is becoming a reality. But this discussion is also heavily controlled, in my mind, by media, politicians, and the public. It's just a general discussion that if you go in 1997, everybody talked about that the future was battery electric. And this is actually mainly drawn from science papers and publications by the conventional media. If you go to 2004, nobody believed that there would be battery electric vehicles in the future. This was just done and we were all going hydrogen. In 2011, it was vice versa again. Hydrogen was fully out and all the car manufacturers were popping out with new models of battery electric cars. I actually hope, and I think we are actually going this way. My dream car is actually a plug-in hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicle, so I can drive to work on batteries, and then if I really need to go somewhere and fast charge, we can do it on hydrogen. That could be the case for buses and so on, but we'll have to see what actually comes from the car manufacturers. But I hope that this is coming together, and this is a discussion we're seeing more now in Iceland, that actually people are believing there will be certain sectors where hydrogen will play a bigger role. But if you look at the just normal conventional travels inside the city of Reykjavik, most people travel there less than 35 kilometers a day. You can do that with batteries. But if we need fast charging and going around and going fishing in the mountains, I don't see a battery electric car doing all of that. You might actually know that Iceland has 100% production of heat and electricity from renewable sources. So the goal, of course, my company's goal is to kill all of these diesel and gasoline. Maybe I'm not doing a good job. We're only at 9.2%, so I have 91% to go. I don't think my life will last that we see this all green. Maybe my grandchildren will see it green, but who knows? But most of this power is not electric or hydrogen. This is mostly blends into gasoline. But there's a long waiting list now for battery electric cars and for plug-in vehicles. And during the last 6 months, 40% of sales of cars to the public have been either pure battery or plug-in. So people, the consumers actually go in that pathway. Most of them, of course, plug-in. But for some brands in the battery electric technology, we have a waiting list for about 6 months to get battery electric cars. So people are actually waking up. The problem in Iceland is that almost half of the new sales cars is to car rental companies. And people like you're saying that it's easy and we should get the tourists to pay twice the amount. The car rental companies in Iceland have no belief that the tourists are willing to pay twice the amount to drive on a green fuel. At least nobody is renting battery electric vehicles. They have them on offer, but nobody is using them except battery electric car owners. There are only a handful of battery car owners in the world. People tend to forget that during the last 10 years we've produced 3 million battery electric cars in the world. At the same time we produced 1 billion gasoline and diesel cars. So actually there are very few users, and those who don't know how to use a battery electric car are afraid when they travel to use it. I mentioned the infrastructure issue, and that's actually what is now becoming the main problem. We've been talking about this chicken and egg problem forever, and that seems to be still the case in many things. People have talked about, and politicians often talk about, that building battery electric charging infrastructure is very simple. Like I described, it's actually not that simple. It's easy in a society like Iceland, where a lot of us live in a private house and it's easy to charge at home. And we're seeing that over 90% of the charging of the battery electric cars are actually done at home. And then you question, why should we build fast charging infrastructure if we more or less charge at home? So we are actually encouraging more or less people or companies to build charging at workplaces, not for guests, but for the employees. The same with of course, when we look at the infrastructure for hydrogen, these stations are expensive. We are, even with the electric price in Iceland, what we are aiming at is to have diesel parity now, and we're not fully reaching it, but very close to it. But of course we know about all the qualities of hydrogen, but what's now being mostly discussed by the utilities is actually to balance the grid with hydrogen production. So they would actually like, so if you go to my older presentation some decade ago, I thought everything would be on-site produced. But now we're seeing that the utilities want to have the electrolyzers on-site where they produce the power, specifically connected to geothermal power plants. Because there are two advantages. It's the grid balancing and also the potential production of synthetic fuels. Because we have CO2 coming up with the geothermal steam. It was described here earlier about the Carbfix project, where we actually pump the CO2 down and make it into a rock again. But we could also use the CO2 for synthetic diesel or other fuel production. The main project we're in hydrogen at the moment is this Hydrogen Mobility Europe project. It's actually two separate projects, but more or less combined into one. This is 49 refueling stations being built, over 1,400 cars and vans deployed. Total cost of 170 million euros, 67 million in funding, and 40 different organizations. The first one, the HTME1, is going to be finishing in the middle of next year, but HTME2 doesn't finish until mid-2022. So there's as you can see, there's a very large portion of vehicles coming in. Most of these cars were actually from Symbio, which were the Renault truck being converted to hydrogen. They have been delayed in delivery, and the customer group has not been too big because the stories about retrofitted vehicles is not the best in the world, and we have had that problems in Iceland. But now Renault has taken over the vehicle development of Symbio, and these vehicles are now branded Renault vehicles with all the warranties and everything that follows with Renault. So we expect to see their sales growing very fast. We now have 3 hydrogen refueling stations in Iceland. 2 of them were opened actually on the same day. So we built them more or less all in Reykjavik. There was a big discussion why not to have more of them out on the countryside to be able to drive further. But the issue was, of course, with redundancy, and that's something that we would really like to see. And the electrolyzer location is on the geothermal power plant of Reykjavik Energy. So actually we truck the hydrogen to the refueling stations. Yeah, this is the plan. If we look at the kind of what is necessary to be able to cover all of Iceland. You can see that we have 3 stations, 2 in Reykjavik and 1 just next to Keflavik Airport, and the idea with that station was also if it could be used in the tourist sector for car rentals. Then of course Akureyri is the main city on the north coast, and would actually be the next station, and mainly connected to the ideas of truck projects. This is the main truck route. This is 400-kilometer drive, so any hydrogen truck, even though it's 350 bar, would be able to cover that. But then we would need additional stations if we're able to drive the circle, and the circle around Iceland is 1,400 kilometers. This is actually when we're opening the different stations. So we have a reasonable car fleet at the moment. Everybody here has been talking about the beautiful picture of hydrogen, but due to a safety incident in Norway earlier this year, we had to shut down all our operations, which is, in a sense, the learning is very important. We have to do learning when these safety incidents happen, but actually what the difficulty is that you have implemented this, you have a lot of customers with vehicles. All of them are very tolerant. They are mostly fleet operators, positive towards green fuels. And we're finally in the process now of reopening the stations after the incident in Norway. But this has had a major, I think it has a larger impact than we thought, mainly because the Norwegian stations are all still out. And we have no idea when they will open up again, because they will not open until a police investigation is finished. And we don't know when or if what will happen in Norway. So the discussion, the view of, for example, politicians and those working in the different segments, there's a lot of correlation between Denmark and Iceland and Norway. And if there are issues in these countries, we don't see the politicians lose a little bit of stamina, but that's to be seen. How we calculate the cost of hydrogen and the price. This is the price of hydrogen at the moment in Iceland, and it's calculated in a way that it costs the same to drive 100 kilometers on gasoline and for hydrogen. We actually foresee, though, that the cost of hydrogen with larger installations of electrolyzers, you can easily go down to at least €8 a kilogram or even lower. So the main focus at the moment is to find large-scale activities, and this is our main focus. It's actually trucks. We're seeing trucks being deployed at the moment. The first trucks being tested by Hyundai at the moment. The code also has trucks. There will be, as has been announced, 1,000 vehicles going to Switzerland, and at least the indication is that 1,500 trucks will come to Europe. We have been in negotiations with Hyundai for quite some time that one of the launch places of these trucks will be in Iceland. There are other locations like Norway, Germany, where there are plans to have the launch. But we'll see in the next few months if this becomes a reality. But nobody can offer as good price of a hydrogen if we actually have a truck project with large-scale electrolyzer installations. So we are very optimistic that trucks will arrive in Iceland during the next 2 or 3 years. And I think that would totally change the perception and mainly the price of hydrogen. And if you have trucks, the cost of hydrogen for local vehicles would also drop. But we'll have to see how this develops. The same interest is in buses, which are being evaluated for service. There has been already testing of battery electric buses in Iceland. We have now 14 Chinese electric buses, and we are evaluating the potential of using hydrogen buses. There will be a bus rapid transport system built up during the next 4 years. And in that, most people think we need to have hydrogen buses so that we can actually get that going. But the cost of or the life cycle costing of a hydrogen bus is just too high at the moment, and it's difficult to justify the investment for such buses. This company, which shows the picture, is actually has been mentioned quite some time, which is CRI, which is producing methanol. And this is actually now being heavily investigated which pathways we can actually mix fuel into the maritime sector. So far, there has not been a humongous interest in hydrogen direct application in Iceland, mainly because there hasn't been a lot of discussion in the society about that. We're seeing now the development in Norway, which is something we follow very carefully. I don't think people realize that they are now in Norway. They have a plan to implement 75 ferries over the next 5 or 6 years. 7 of those are going to be hydrogen. The first one is already under planning, will be going in service in the Stavanger region with actually liquid hydrogen produced in Germany, transported all the way to Norway. But they will go into service in 2021, and we're following that heavily. There's also a small fishing boat being developed on hydrogen in Norway. So there's a lot of interest there, and this is something we are trying to bring knowledge of to Iceland, because we see this as a potential fuel. But if you talk to the ship owners in Iceland, they more see synthetic diesel as a mix into maritime gas oil in the beginning. We've also talked about methanol, because we have a methanol production plant already, and we have a commercial like Wärtsilä is producing methanol engines. This is something that we think can be implemented immediately, but the knowledge of these technologies is very low, and this is something that we need to get pilot projects on, and we're encouraging the government to actually equip their own ships with such technologies. We have a Faroese partner also in Huge. We have done quite a lot of analysis in Faroe Islands, which is wind to hydrogen. This is maybe mostly concerned to actually what we're doing directly in the Huge project. But we have done calculations for very small islands where there are non-grid connections. And the interesting part is that some of these islands are actually feasible right now to go to wind to hydrogen. The key issue, of course, is like they fly diesel with helicopters to these places, and that's crazy expensive. So actually the cost of the diesel is very high. We have also gone and discussed this in Canada. We met with people in Nova Scotia and Labrador, and there the most expensive electricity they have in Labrador is $25 a kilowatt hour. And this is, of course, if hydrogen can go somewhere, in those regions they have very good wind in the wintertime, and they have good sun in the summertime. So if you install both PVs and wind, you can actually do this much cheaper than $25 a kilowatt hour. The main problem with these remote areas is that when we approach the electrolyzer producer, the fuel cell manufacturers and so on, they are very scared of the warranty of the systems, because if you need to do maintenance on these systems, you have to fly with a helicopter to the location. And if you go to these remote places, usually there are people who know to operate a diesel genset. So to change from a diesel genset to this modern technology would need a lot of training for people to be able to maintain the systems. And that's something that is probably an activity which we have to connect to projects like this one and others, to actually spread the word, but to teach people actually to maintain the systems. Well, as I said, as a conclusion, Iceland was the pioneer. Economic crisis and the battery electric hype changed the hydrogen movement a little bit. We have now a very, very strong Nordic cooperation, specifically between Norway, Denmark, and Iceland. Sweden is also there. Unfortunately, Finland has not been very active. We're now having more interest from VTT, so we actually set up an agreement with VTT on a larger cooperation to include Finland in more of the planning and information. So I think we're all convinced that hydrogen will play a very important role, and it's just a question how we actually collaborate, open information flow, and we need to regain political support for hydrogen, because I'm quite sure the Nordic is the paradise for hydrogen development. Thank you very much. Questions?
What's the view on the ground of hydrogen in Iceland? You know, the person on the street, what's their thoughts about hydrogen?
Like I said, a lot of people either are hydrogen or battery. And at the moment, the battery people are the majority of the population. I think more or less all people working in the sector realize that hydrogen has to be there. If you went to the utilities 4 years ago, they were not that interested in hydrogen yet. If you go to the utilities today, hydrogen is very high on the agenda of all the electric companies, because they do not see how to provide the infrastructure for battery electric technologies, except for smaller personal vehicles, which is not that complicated. But for a large-scale installation, even with 14 buses, the reason they are 14 is that was the capacity of the line into the bus depot. So if they do the 15th bus, they need a major investment just to get the electricity in there. So this is actually, people are understanding more and more about the limitations of the charging infrastructure and the cost of that. And we're also in good collaboration with Vattenfall in Europe. And we saw recently studies from them where they did studies on building hydrogen infrastructure at their Rasthoffs, at the Autobahns, compared to building electric charging stations. They're not looking at the passenger vehicles, but looking at the larger vehicles. And the cost of the charging system is outrageously more expensive than actually for hydrogen. So utilities are now pushing more and more towards hydrogen because they have no clue how to get the grid and how to get the electrons to the user in the future if that would be the case. So this is something that people are slowly and gradually understanding. They're also understanding that actually maintaining fast chargers, like we now have a grid of fast chargers around the island. Some of them have been used twice during the last 2 years, but they've failed twice. So you can imagine the cost. We have to fly repair people from Reykjavik to Iceland. They have to drive, so you have to pay the flight, you have to pay the food cost, you have to pay the working cost and so on, and you're selling electricity for maybe €2 during the last 2 years. So it doesn't make any economic sense. This is something that these people are also learning at the moment.
Okay, you seem to have a very interesting perspective and experience, so I would ask you to have an honest opinion on us. Why do you think Finland has not been so involved? You don't need to be accountable. Was it streamed, by the way?
I actually don't fully know, because what Wojciechowski was doing for a long period of time in building, a lot of people in the hydrogen sector thought was a very promising development. But they, like many others, they were ahead of time, like was described earlier. And that actually creates problem when you're ahead of time and you build, you spend a lot of resources to construct this, and then it doesn't actually pay off. I don't know, somebody told me that the incentive program for zero-emission vehicles was not very high in Finland. I don't know if that's true, but we have seen the implementation of these technologies in countries like Iceland, Norway, and Denmark, mainly because of incentives. If you look at Denmark, for example, which is they revoked the incentives for battery electric vehicles in 2000, I think 15 or 16, I don't remember. And you can see the sales of battery electric cars went from, they were the 4th highest in the world, down to being one of the lowest in the world. There were just no sales of battery electric cars if you didn't have the incentives. But that's actually, I'm sure, a lot of this would happen also in Iceland if you would revoke incentives. Because today, still, a battery electric car costs you maybe 7,000–8,000 euros more when you buy it than a conventional diesel car, even with the incentives. But you make that up over about a couple of years operation because the electricity is more or less free for the car. So the only way to stimulate the market, it's not like Icelanders are like, yeah, I'm going to be green, and we're all like, yeah. That's not the case. It's just, people just look at the money side. And if you can see the calculation that being green is actually paying off. And that actually is one of the things that pisses me off a little bit, sorry for the language, is that people are saying, why is hydrogen at the same cost as gasoline? And I'm saying, like, that's actually amazing that we can offer you a fuel which is green at the same cost as gasoline or diesel. And because if you go to the store and ask for carrots, which are organic, you pay 30% more, and that's everybody, that's no problem, it's more expensive to grow them. But suddenly green fuel should be cheaper because electricity is so cheap. So I'm not sure why. I sincerely hope Wojciechowski and VTT and others, because there's a lot of technological development. And VTT is doing a lot of work in hydrogen, for example, and same with Wojciechowski. So we just need a little bit of stimulant to go again, and we wait for Wojciechowski to rebuild the hydrogen refueling station and start again. But the car market is still very small. We have to look at that. Toyota is producing 3,000 cars a year. Hyundai is producing 3,000 cars a year. This is a very, very small production. There's a long waiting line. We know now Hyundai is building a fuel cell plant to produce 30,000 stacks a year. And Toyota is doing the same, and they will start in 2021 and 2022 to build 30,000 units a year of each type of car. But 30,000 units is nothing when we sell almost 100 million cars per year. So it's just a fraction. And so it will take some time. And I think if we don't see a better development in buses and trucks, we might actually go. I might be here 20 years ago, after 20 years again, saying that everything collapsed because the market didn't pick up, because we didn't have the solution to actually use the hydrogen. To produce hydrogen is very easy. Actually, to use it is the complicated part, or to get somebody to dispense it.
Do you think that the developments in China are going to change the landscape worldwide?
They are. They have already started changing the landscape. And I went to visit this Yutong plant, which produced the battery electric buses for Iceland. They produce 67,000 buses a year. That's 200 a day. So it takes them about 18 hours to convert all the Icelandic buses, if we would do that. 27,000 of those buses are now pure battery electric. And they showed me solutions for 4 different types of hydrogen fuel cell buses. And they showed me a coach, which almost had the same cargo space as a conventional coach on hydrogen. So they are also coming into the same problem with the grid system for all these fleet operators. There are 2 now car companies have been established by former BMW and Daimler players who are all going to launch luxury hydrogen cars next year. This might totally change the picture, but I'm not going to say it's going to change the picture until I see the goddamn car on the road. Anything else? Thank you.